The smell of frying bacon drew Eleanor Foster through the dusty streets of Lordsburg, New Mexico, though she knew better than to follow her hunger into the saloon where most of the townspeople gathered for their meals. It was 1878, and the July heat made everything shimmer like a mirage, but the cruelty of the people in this frontier town was all too real. Eleanor had learned that lesson the hard way during her first week here, when she had dared to sit at the communal table in the boarding house dining room and reach for a second helping of potatoes. "Lord have mercy, save some for the rest of us, Mrs. Henderson had said, her voice dripping with false sweetness that fooled no one. "Though I suppose with your size, you need it more than most." The other boarders had laughed, and Eleanor had felt her face burn with a shame that had become as familiar as her own shadow. At 24 years old, and weighing considerably more than society deemed acceptable for a woman, Eleanor had endured a lifetime of such comments. She had come to Lordsburg to start fresh after her parents passed, leaving her a small inheritance that she hoped would be enough to open a seamstress shop. Her skill with a needle was undeniable. Even if her appearance made people doubt she could create the beautiful, delicate garments she specialized in. Now, 3 months into her stay in this unforgiving town, Eleanor had taken to eating alone in her small rented room, buying provisions from the general store when she could avoid the crowd, and trying to make herself as invisible as possible. It was a lonely existence, but it hurt less than facing the mockery that seemed to follow her wherever she went. She was heading back to her room with a small sack of flour and some dried beans when she heard the commotion coming from outside the Silver Spur saloon. A crowd had gathered, their laughter harsh and mean-spirited, and Eleanor knew she should keep walking. Nothing good ever came from these spectacles, but something made her pause at the edge of the crowd, and she saw what had captured everyone's attention. A man was being pushed out of the saloon by 3 rough-looking cowboys, their faces red with drink and aggression. The man they were pushing was tall and lean, with dark hair that fell past his collar, and a quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate his tormentors even more. "We don't want your kind cooking our food," one of the cowboys shouted. "Go back where you came from, half-breed." Eleanor's stomach turned at the slur. The man being pushed had the features of someone with both white and Native American heritage, and she could see the tension in his jaw as he tried to maintain his composure. "I was hired by the owner," the man said calmly, his voice steady despite the violence being threatened. "Take it up with him." "The owner ain't here and we're taking it up with you," another cowboy snarled, shoving him hard enough that he stumbled. Eleanor found herself stepping forward before she could think better of it. "Leave him alone." The words came out stronger than she felt, and suddenly all eyes were on her. The crowd that had been so eager to watch a man be beaten now turned their attention to her, and she saw the familiar mixture of surprise and derision on their faces. "Well, well," the first cowboy said, looking her up and down with exaggerated slowness. "If it ain't the elephant from the boarding house, what's it to you, lady?" "Yeah, you sweet on the Indian," another one jeered. "2 freaks together, how touching." The laughter that followed made Eleanor want to disappear into the ground, but she forced herself to stand firm. "I said leave him alone. He has done nothing to you." "Eleanor, do not," the man said quietly, and she was surprised he knew her name. "I can handle this." But the cowboys were not interested in letting either of them go now. The largest of the 3 stepped toward Eleanor, his breath reeking of whiskey. "Maybe you should mind your own business and go find something to eat. Lord knows you spend enough time doing that." More laughter erupted from the crowd, and Eleanor felt the familiar sting of tears threatening. But before the cowboy could say anything else, The man she had tried to defend moved with surprising speed. He stepped between Eleanor and her tormentor, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "The lady asked you politely," he said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "I suggest you listen." The cowboy's face darkened with rage, and his hand moved toward his own weapon. The street went silent, the tension suddenly deadly serious. Eleanor held her breath, terrified that her impulsive decision to speak up had just gotten someone killed. "That's enough," a new voice called out, and Sheriff Morgan pushed through the crowd, his weathered face stern. "Jake, you and your boys get out of here before I lock you up for disturbing the peace." The cowboys grumbled but backed down, shooting murderous looks at both Eleanor and the man before they slouched away. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that there would be no violence to entertain them, though Eleanor heard plenty of muttered comments about her weight and appetite as people passed. The sheriff tipped his hat to her. "Miss Foster, Mr. Vaughn, best you both go about your business now." Eleanor nodded, clutching her bag of provisions tightly, and started to hurry away. Her heart was pounding, and she felt shaky from the confrontation. She had made it perhaps 20 feet when she heard footsteps behind her. "Wait, please." She turned to find the man following her, his expression earnest. Up close, she could see he was probably around 28 or 29, with warm brown eyes and a face that would have been handsome if not for the fresh bruise blooming on his cheekbone. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "That was brave what you did back there." Eleanor shook her head. "It was foolish. I nearly got you shot. You stood up when no one else would. That takes courage." He held out his hand. "Benjamin Vaughn, most people call me Ben." She hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was warm and firm, and he did not pull away quickly as if touching her repulsed him, the way most people did. "Eleanor Foster, though I suppose you already knew that." "I have seen you around town," he admitted. "You have been working on setting up a dress shop on Main Street, right?" "In the old post office building," she was surprised he had noticed. "I am trying to. It is slow going." "I am sure you will do well. I have heard people talk about your work." Mrs. Chen at the boarding house said you altered her daughter's wedding dress, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Eleanor felt a small warmth in her chest at the compliment, though it was quickly overshadowed by embarrassment. That is kind of her to say. Ben glanced back toward the saloon, then looked at her with what seemed like genuine concern. "Are you all right? Those men were cruel to you." "I am used to it," Eleanor said quietly, then wished she had not. It sounded so pathetic when said aloud. His expression darkened. "That does not make it acceptable." They stood there in the dusty street, two outcasts who had found themselves connected by an act of violence that had not quite happened. Eleanor knew she should make her excuses and leave. Getting close to anyone in this town only led to more heartache. But there was something about the way Ben looked at her, as if he actually saw her as a person rather than just a body to be mocked, that made her want to linger. "You said you were hired to cook at the saloon?" she asked, surprising herself. He nodded. "The owner, Mr. Patterson, needed someone who could handle the kitchen. His last cook ran off with a traveling merchant. I worked as a trail cook for several years, and I know my way around food, but some of the customers are not happy about my heritage." "That is their ignorance, not your failing," Eleanor said firmly. A small smile crossed his face, transforming it completely. "Same could be said about the comments directed at you." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm, but not entirely from embarrassment. When was the last time someone had implied that the cruelty she faced was the fault of the cruel, not herself? She could not remember. "I should let you go," Ben said, though he seemed reluctant. "But I would like to repay your kindness. Would you allow me to cook you a meal, a proper one, I mean? Not the scraps they serve at the boarding house." Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of eating in front of anyone, even this kind stranger, filled her with anxiety. People always watched what she ate, judged every bite, made comments about her portions. But something in Ben's face stopped her from declining immediately. He was not looking at her with pity or mockery. He looked genuinely hopeful that she would accept. "I do not want to be any trouble," she said carefully. "No trouble at all. I have a small cabin just outside of town near the creek. Nothing fancy, but it is private and peaceful. I would be honored if you would join me for supper tomorrow evening. 6 o'clock. The word private decided it for her. No audience. No whispers and pointed fingers. Just a meal, eaten in peace, cooked by someone who apparently wanted nothing more than to thank her for a moment of basic human decency. 6 o'clock, she agreed, and the smile he gave her made her feel like she had done something wonderful rather than simply accepting an invitation to dinner. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Eleanor tried to focus on her work, measuring and cutting fabric for a dress commission from one of the few clients who seemed to care more about her skill than her appearance. But her mind kept drifting to the evening ahead, alternating between nervous anticipation and the certainty that she was making a terrible mistake. She changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple blue cotton that she had made herself, with careful seams that did not strain over her curves and a neckline that was modest but not severe. She had learned long ago how to dress her body in ways that minimized, that tried to hide what could not be hidden. But today, she found herself choosing something that actually fit well and was flattering rather than merely concealing. The walk to Ben's cabin took about 20 minutes, following the main road out of town, and then down a smaller path that led toward the sound of running water. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the heat of the day was finally breaking into something more bearable. The cabin came into view, small and well-maintained, with smoke rising from the chimney and the smell of cooking food drifting out to meet her. Eleanor's stomach rumbled in response, and she felt a pang of the familiar shame that came with her appetite. But she had been invited here specifically to eat. Ben had asked her to come for a meal. Surely he would not judge her for actually consuming it. She knocked on the door, and it opened almost immediately. Ben stood there, looking pleased to see her, his hair damp as if he had just washed it. He had changed into a clean shirt, and she noticed he had shaved the stubble that had shadowed his jaw the day before. "Eleanor, come in," he said warmly, stepping aside to let her enter. The cabin was indeed small. Basically one large room with a bed in one corner, a table and chairs near the fireplace, and a cooking area with a proper stove that looked like it had been recently installed. Everything was neat and organized, with personal touches that spoke of someone who took pride in his space despite its humble size. There were books on a shelf, a colorful woven blanket on the bed that looked like Native American craftwork, and dried herbs hanging from the rafters. "It smells wonderful," Eleanor said honestly. The aromas coming from the stove were making her mouth water. "I hope you are hungry," Ben said, pulling out a chair for her at the table. "I may have gotten a bit carried away." He was not exaggerating. Over the next few minutes, he brought dish after dish to the table, each one looking and smelling better than the last. There was a roasted chicken, golden and crispy skinned, alongside bowls of mashed potatoes, green beans cooked with bacon, fresh baked rolls still warm from the oven, and a pot of rich gravy. For someone used to eating dried beans and hard bread in her lonely room, it was a feast. Eleanor stared at the spread with a mixture of longing and anxiety. It was too much. If she ate the amount she actually wanted to eat, he would surely think less of her, would make the same judgments everyone else did. Better to take small, ladylike portions and pretend she was satisfied. But Ben was looking at her with such genuine pleasure in his cooking, such clear hope that she would enjoy what he had made. He filled his own plate generously, then served her a chicken leg and began spooning potatoes and vegetables onto her plate. "Wait," Eleanor said quickly. "That is too much." He paused, looking confused. "Too much? I figured you would want more than this. Here, let me add some more chicken." "No, really, I could not possibly eat all that," Eleanor protested, even as her stomach contracted with hunger. Ben set down the serving spoon and looked at her directly. His expression was kind but serious. "Eleanor, I invited you here to have a proper meal. I spent all afternoon cooking food that I hoped you would enjoy. Please, do not insult my efforts by pretending you are not hungry." "I am hungry," she admitted quietly. "I am always hungry. But people do not like it when I eat. They say things." His jaw tightened. "People say things because they are small-minded and cruel. I have heard those comments my whole life, just about different things. My mother was Mescalero Apache, my father was a white trapper. Neither community fully accepted me. I know what it is like to be judged for something you cannot change about yourself." Eleanor felt tears prickling at her eyes. "It is not the same. Maybe not exactly, but close enough that I understand. And I am telling you right now, in my home, at my table, you can eat until you are full. Actually full, not that pretend full that is really still hungry. That is why I cooked all this food. For you." The tears spilled over then, and she tried to wipe them away quickly, embarrassed by the display of emotion. But Ben simply reached across the table and took her hand, waiting until she met his eyes. "Eat until you are full," he said again, his voice gentle but firm. "Please." Something broke open inside Eleanor's chest, some tight knot of shame and self-denial that she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and Ben squeezed her hand once before letting go and returning to serving the food. This time, when he loaded her plate, she did not protest. She let him give her generous portions of everything, and when they began to eat, she did not take tiny, apologetic bites. She ate, really ate. The chicken was perfectly seasoned and so tender it fell off the bone. The mashed potatoes were creamy and rich with butter. The green beans had a smoky flavor from the bacon that made them completely different from the overboiled vegetables she was used to. And the rolls were a revelation, soft and slightly sweet, perfect for soaking up the gravy. Ben was an excellent cook, and he watched her eat with clear satisfaction, asking her opinion on different dishes, and seeming genuinely pleased when she praised his skills. He told her stories about his time as a trail cook, the challenges of preparing meals over an open fire while cattle lowed in the background and dust got into everything. "Why did you stop?" Eleanor asked, reaching for her third roll without thinking about it. She paused, suddenly self-conscious, but Ben just pushed the butter closer to her. "I got tired of the constant moving," he said. "And the treatment got worse as more settlers came west. Used to be, a good cook was valued no matter what he looked like or who his parents were. But lately, there is more division, more hatred. I wanted a place where I could just do my work without constantly defending my right to exist." "Did you find that here?" Eleanor asked, thinking of the scene outside the saloon yesterday. He shrugged. "Still working on it. But Mr. Patterson has been good to me, and I am hoping the others will come around once they taste my cooking. Food has a way of bringing people together, when they let it." They talked through the entire meal, and Eleanor was surprised by how easy it was. Ben was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from the best way to cure bacon to the tensions brewing between ranchers and farmers over land rights. He asked her about her seamstress work and actually listened to her answers, asking follow-up questions that showed real interest. When the main meal was finished, Ben brought out a berry cobbler that he had somehow found time to make, served with fresh cream. Eleanor was genuinely full by this point, her stomach pleasantly stretched in a way it rarely was, but the cobbler looked too good to resist. "I probably should not," she said, eyeing it longingly. "Probably should," Ben countered, cutting her a generous slice. "I picked those berries myself yesterday, and I will be offended if you do not at least try it." So she did, and it was worth every bite. The berries were tart and sweet, the crust flaky and buttery, the cream cool and rich. She ate the entire piece, scraping up the last bits of juice with her spoon, and when she finally set it down, she felt genuinely satisfied for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Thank you," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "That was the best meal I have had in years, maybe ever." Ben's smile was warm enough to rival the fire in the hearth. "Thank you for sharing it with me. It is a lot more enjoyable to cook when you know someone will actually appreciate the results." They moved to the chairs near the fireplace as the evening deepened into night, and the conversation continued to flow easily. Eleanor found herself telling him things she had not shared with anyone, about her parents' death, about the loneliness of being in a new place where no one seemed to want her, about her dreams for her shop, and her fears that she would never succeed because people could not see past her appearance to her actual skills. "They will come around," Ben said with confidence. "Your work is too good for them not to, and anyone who judges you by your size rather than your talent is a fool not worth your time." "There seem to be a lot of fools in Lordsburg," Eleanor said wryly. "Cannot argue with that. But there are good people too. You just have to find them, or let them find you." The comment hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that Eleanor was almost afraid to examine too closely. Was he suggesting that he was one of those good people? That she had found him, or he had found her? When she finally rose to leave with promises to return the kindness and an invitation to visit her shop soon, Ben insisted on walking her back to town, despite her protests that it was not necessary. The moon was nearly full, lighting their path, and the night air was cool and pleasant after the heat of the day. "I enjoyed this evening very much," Ben said as they reached the edge of town. "Would you allow me to cook for you again, maybe this Saturday?" Eleanor knew she should hesitate, should protect herself from getting too attached to someone who would inevitably discover that being seen with her brought its own social costs. But the memory of sitting at his table, eating until she was truly full without judgment or commentary, was too precious to give up so easily. "I would like that," she said. His smile in the moonlight was beautiful. "Good. I will plan something special." Over the following weeks, their Saturday dinners became a cherished ritual. Ben cooked elaborate meals, each one seemingly designed to introduce Eleanor to new flavors and textures. He made her spicy stews that reflected his mother's Apache heritage, teaching her about traditional ingredients and cooking methods. He prepared delicate French dishes that he had learned from a fancy hotel chef he had worked with in Santa Fe. He experimented with different types of bread, with roasted meats and fresh vegetables, with desserts that ranged from simple to spectacular. And every time, he said the same thing when Eleanor hesitated or tried to take smaller portions than she wanted. "Eat until you are full." Those 5 words became a lifeline, a permission she had never thought to seek and had rarely been granted. In Ben's cabin, she could be herself. She could eat without apology, could take pleasure in good food without shame, could actually satisfy her hunger instead of constantly denying it to satisfy the judgments of others. But the meals were only part of what made those evenings special. Ben himself was the real revelation. He was kind and intelligent, funny and thoughtful. He treated her like she mattered, like her opinions were worth hearing, like her presence was genuinely desired rather than merely tolerated. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their histories and their hopes, their fears and their dreams. Eleanor found herself thinking about him constantly. When she was working on a dress, she would imagine telling him about the particular challenge of a difficult seam or the satisfaction of getting a hem exactly right. When she read the newspaper, she would mentally file away interesting articles to discuss with him. When she was falling asleep at night, she would replay their conversations, remembering the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, or how his voice got softer when he talked about his mother. She was falling in love with him, and the realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Because surely Ben only saw her as a friend, someone he felt sympathy for because they were both outsiders in this harsh town. He had never indicated any romantic interest, never tried to hold her hand beyond that first time, never looked at her with anything more than friendly warmth. And why would he? Eleanor knew what she looked like. She was not the kind of woman men fell in love with. She was the kind of woman they mocked or pitied or ignored entirely. But on the 8th Saturday of their dinners together, something shifted. Ben had made roast beef with all the trimmings, and they had eaten their way through the meal with the comfortable ease of people who knew each other well. Eleanor had noticed that he seemed a bit nervous, refilling her wine glass perhaps more often than necessary, and occasionally seeming to lose the thread of conversation mid-sentence. When the meal was finished and they had moved to the fireside, Ben sat down in his chair and then immediately stood up again, pacing to the window and back. "Are you all right?" Eleanor asked, concerned. "You seem troubled." "Not troubled exactly," Ben said. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had learned meant he was working up to something difficult. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something and I am afraid of how you will respond." Her heart sank. This was it then. He had realized that being seen with her was damaging his reputation, or he had found someone else, someone more suitable. She braced herself for the rejection she had known was inevitable. "Go ahead," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Ben took a deep breath and met her eyes. "These past 2 months have been the best of my life. I look forward to our Saturday dinners all week long. I find myself cooking things and imagining your reaction to them. I see something interesting and think about how I want to tell you about it. When I am not with you, I wish I was. And when I am with you, I do not want you to leave." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "Ben, let me finish," he said quickly. "I know this might not be welcome. I know you might not feel the same way, but I have to tell you the truth. Eleanor, I have fallen in love with you. Completely, entirely in love with you. Your kindness, your strength, your intelligence, your humor, the way you light up when you talk about something you are passionate about, everything about you." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, impossible and wonderful. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. "You cannot mean that," she whispered. Ben crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his. "I absolutely mean it. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Eleanor Foster, not despite who you are, but because of it, all of it. But I am." She gestured helplessly at herself, unable to even articulate the objection that seemed so obvious to her. "You are beautiful," Ben said firmly. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever known, inside and out. And I am not saying that to be kind or to make you feel better. I am saying it because it is the truth as I see it. When I look at you, I see someone strong enough to stand up for a stranger in the street even when it cost her." Someone talented enough to create gorgeous things with her hands. Someone brave enough to keep trying in a place that has been unkind to her. Someone who deserves to be loved exactly as she is. Eleanor could not stop crying now, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of hope, of a joy so profound it almost hurt. "I love you too," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have been in love with you for weeks, but I never imagined that you could possibly feel the same way." The smile that broke across Ben's face was radiant. He stood, pulling her up with him, and then his hands were cupping her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Can I kiss you?" he asked softly. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice, and then his lips were on hers and the world narrowed down to just that moment, that connection. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, Ben rested his forehead against hers. "I want to build a life with you," he said. "I want Saturday dinners to turn into every night. I want to wake up beside you and fall asleep holding you. I want to support your dreams and share mine with you. I want everything, if you will have me." "Yes," Eleanor said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes to all of it." They stood there holding each other as the fire crackled and the night deepened around them, two people who had found in each other exactly what they had been searching for. The announcement of their courtship caused exactly the stir Eleanor had feared it would. The gossips of Lordsburg had a field day, making crude jokes about Ben's motivations and Eleanor's desperation. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house made pointed comments about how some people would take advantage of a lonely woman. The Cowboys who had tried to run Ben out of town seemed to take personal offense at the relationship, as if it was a direct insult to them. But there were surprises too. Mrs. Chen, who had praised Eleanor's dressmaking skills, came by the shop to offer her congratulations and to tell Eleanor that she thought Ben was a good man and they would be happy together. The sheriff tipped his hat to them when he saw them walking together and told Ben he was lucky to have found such a fine woman. Mr. Patterson, the saloon owner, gave Ben a raise and started advertising the establishment as having the best food in Lordsburg, which slowly started to bring in customers who cared more about the quality of the meal than the heritage of the cook. Eleanor's dress shop began to thrive as well. Word spread about her skills, and women started coming from surrounding ranches and even from other towns to commission garments from her. She had a gift for understanding what each client wanted and needed, for creating clothes that made women feel beautiful and confident regardless of their size or shape. Her own experience had taught her how to fit and flatter bodies of all types, and her work reflected that hard-won knowledge. Ben supported her dreams with the same enthusiasm he brought to his cooking, helping her move into a larger shop space on Main Street and building her additional display areas and storage for her growing inventory of fabrics. In return, Eleanor became his champion, talking up his cooking skills to everyone she met and bringing potential customers to the saloon to experience his food for themselves. They were good for each other and good together, and eventually even the harshest critics had to acknowledge that the relationship seemed to be built on genuine affection and mutual respect, rather than convenience or desperation. 6 months after that first kiss, Ben proposed properly, with a ring he had commissioned from the jeweler in town. It was a simple gold band with a small sapphire, Eleanor's favorite stone, and when he slipped it onto her finger, Eleanor felt like the luckiest woman alive. They were married on a crisp October morning in 1879, with Sheriff Morgan serving as a witness and Mrs. Chen helping Eleanor into a wedding dress of her own creation. It was ivory silk with delicate embroidery, fitted perfectly to her body without trying to hide or minimize her curves. Ben's eyes, when he saw her walking toward him, made her feel like the most beautiful bride who had ever lived. The ceremony was simple, held at the small church on the edge of town, and the reception was an intimate gathering at the saloon after hours. Ben had prepared a feast, of course, with dishes that celebrated both his heritage and hers, and Eleanor ate until she was full, comfortable, and joyous, surrounded by the small community of people who had come to accept them both. Their wedding night was spent in Ben's cabin, which would be their home until they could afford something larger. Eleanor had been nervous about the physical intimacy, worried that Ben would be disappointed or repulsed once they were actually in bed together. But his touch was reverent, his kisses worshipful, and when he told her she was beautiful, she finally, truly believed him. He loved every inch of her, proved it with his hands and mouth and body, and Eleanor discovered that pleasure was something she was allowed to have without shame. The years that followed were not without challenges. The prejudice they faced did not disappear overnight, and there were still people in Lordsburg who treated them with disdain or hostility. The winter of 1880 was particularly harsh, and money was tight as both the shop and the saloon saw fewer customers. Ben's father, who he had not seen in over a decade, showed up drunk one night demanding money and had to be escorted out by the sheriff. Eleanor suffered a miscarriage in the spring of 1881 that left them both devastated and grieving. But through it all, they had each other. They had Saturday dinners that had indeed turned into every night, with Ben cooking meals that nourished both body and soul and Eleanor appreciating every bite. They had quiet mornings over coffee, discussing the day ahead. They had long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply sitting in comfortable silence. They had laughter and passion, support and partnership, the kind of love that sustained through both good times and bad. Eleanor's shop grew into one of the most successful businesses in Lordsburg. She hired 2 assistants to help with the increased demand and began shipping garments to clients in other territories. She became known throughout New Mexico for her skill and her kindness, for the way she made every woman who came through her door feel valued and beautiful. Ben's reputation as a cook spread as well, and he eventually became the head chef at a new hotel that opened in Lordsburg in 1883. He trained other cooks, sharing his knowledge and his techniques, and took pride in creating a kitchen where people of all backgrounds could work together based on their skills rather than their ancestry. In the fall of 1884, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy progressed smoothly, and on a warm June morning in 1885, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Samuel. He had Ben's dark hair and Eleanor's gray eyes, and holding him for the first time, Eleanor felt a completeness she had not known was possible. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, named Rose for Eleanor's mother. She was a laughing, cheerful baby who seemed to find delight in everything around her. And in 1889, another son completed their family, a quiet, thoughtful child they called Daniel. The children grew up knowing they were loved unconditionally, by parents who understood what it meant to be judged unfairly, and who were determined to raise them with kindness and strength. They grew up in a house where good food was celebrated and shared, where appetites were never shameful and bodies were never mocked. They grew up knowing that their father's heritage was something to be proud of, that their mother's size had nothing to do with her worth, that love was more powerful than prejudice. Ben taught Samuel and Daniel to cook, passing on recipes and techniques that had been handed down through generations. Eleanor taught Rose to sew, though all 3 children learned the basics of both skills. More importantly, both parents taught their children to stand up for those who were being treated unjustly. to see past surface appearances to the person underneath, to build lives based on their own values rather than the narrow expectations of society. By the time they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Ben and Eleanor had built something remarkable. They had a family, a home, successful careers, and the respect of most of their community. The people who had once mocked them had largely moved on or learned to keep their opinions to themselves. New residents in Lordsburg knew Ben and Eleanor simply as established, respected members of the town, the talented dressmaker and the gifted chef, the devoted parents and loving couple. On the evening of that anniversary, Ben closed the hotel kitchen early and came home to prepare a special meal, just the two of them, while the children spent the night with Mrs. Chen. It was a recreation of that first dinner he had cooked for Eleanor all those years ago: roasted chicken and mashed potatoes and green beans and fresh rolls, followed by berry cobbler with cream. "You remember what I told you that night?" Ben asked as they sat down to eat. Eleanor smiled, her heart full of love and gratitude for this man who had changed her life so completely. "You told me to eat until I was full. I meant it then, and I mean it now, and not just about food." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I want you to live fully, Eleanor. To take up all the space you need, to pursue all your dreams, to never apologize for being exactly who you are. You have brought me more joy than I ever imagined possible, and I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, the happy kind that had become so much more common than the sad ones over the past decade. "You already do that, every single day. Loving you, being loved by you, it has been the greatest gift of my life. You saw me when everyone else looked away. You valued me when everyone else dismissed me. You loved me when I could not even love myself. You made it easy," Ben said softly. "You were always worth loving, I just helped you see it." They ate their anniversary dinner with the same appreciation and joy they had brought to that first meal, savoring both the food and each other's company. When they were finished, genuinely full and content, they moved to the porch to watch the sunset paint the New Mexico sky in brilliant shades of orange and red and purple. Eleanor leaned against her husband, his arm around her shoulders, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. She thought about the scared, lonely woman who had walked through Lordsburg 3 months before that confrontation in the street, eating alone in her room and trying to make herself invisible. She thought about the moment she had found the courage to speak up for a stranger, never imagining it would lead to this life, this love, this happiness. "What are you thinking about?" Ben asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "How lucky I am," Eleanor said. "How different my life could have been if I had not met you." "I am the lucky one," Ben insisted. "And I think we were meant to find each other. Two people who knew what it was to be judged, who understood that cruelty says more about the person delivering it than the person receiving it. We were always going to recognize each other, I think." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, counting their blessings and dreaming about the future. There would be more challenges ahead, certainly. Life was never without them. But they would face those challenges together, supporting each other through whatever came, secure in a love that had been tested and proven strong. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Small triumphs and occasional setbacks, the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a life. Samuel showed an aptitude for cooking that rivaled his father's, and eventually took over Ben's position at the hotel, when Ben decided he wanted to slow down and spend more time with family. Rose combined her mother's talent for sewing with her own artistic vision, and opened a second shop specializing in more avant-garde designs for younger clients. Daniel became a teacher, dedicated to educating children of all backgrounds and fighting the prejudices that had made his parents' early years in Lordsburg so difficult. All three married partners who loved them for who they were. And in time, Ben and Eleanor became grandparents to a lively collection of grandchildren who called them Nana and Papa, and climbed all over them demanding stories and cookies. The old cabin where Ben had first cooked for Eleanor was transformed into a guest house for visiting family, and they built a larger home on the same property, with a huge kitchen where Ben could still indulge his passion for cooking, and a sewing room where Eleanor could work on special projects. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies changing in the ways bodies do with age. But Ben still looked at Eleanor with the same love and appreciation he had shown her on that first evening, and Eleanor still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her. They still had Saturday dinners, even though dinner was every night together, because that tradition was sacred, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. On a warm evening in the summer of 1910, exactly 32 years after that confrontation in the street that had brought them together, Ben and Eleanor sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their children were grown and successful, their grandchildren were healthy and happy, their legacy was secure in the lives they had touched and the love they had shared. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" Ben asked, reaching for Eleanor's hand. "Only about a dozen times today," Eleanor replied, smiling, "but I never get tired of hearing it. Good, because I never get tired of saying it." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "You know, when I invited you to dinner all those years ago, I just wanted to thank you for standing up for me. I never imagined it would lead to all this." "All this," Eleanor teased. "You mean the children and grandchildren and decades of happiness." "Exactly that. A whole life, built on the foundation of a simple meal and the revolutionary idea that you deserve to eat until you were full." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, thinking about that scared young woman who had been so startled by the permission to satisfy her hunger, both literal and metaphorical. "It was revolutionary, at least for me. You gave me permission to take up space, to have needs, to be fully human instead of constantly apologizing for existing. You always were fully human. I just helped you believe it. You did more than that. You loved me, truly, completely, without reservation or conditions. Do you know how rare that is? How precious?" Ben wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "I know exactly how precious it is, because you gave me the same gift. You saw past what other people focused on and loved the person I actually was. We saved each other, I think." They sat together as the light faded and the stars emerged. Two people who had found in each other everything they had needed, everything they had hoped for, and so much more than they had ever dared to dream possible. The journey had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. Every challenge overcome and every obstacle faced, because they had faced them together. Inside their home, there was a photograph on the mantel, faded now with age but still clear enough to make out the subjects. It showed a younger Ben and Eleanor on their wedding day, looking at each other with such obvious love and joy that everyone who saw it smiled. Below the photograph was a small plaque that one of their grandchildren had made, inscribed with 5 simple words that had changed everything. "Eat until you are full." It was a reminder, a philosophy, a promise. It meant nourishment and satisfaction, pleasure without shame, needs acknowledged and met. But it meant so much more than that, too. It meant taking up space without apology. It meant living fully and authentically. It meant loving and being loved exactly as you were. It meant recognizing that you deserved good things, that your hunger mattered, that you were worthy of having it satisfied. Those 5 words had been the beginning of Eleanor's transformation from a woman who tried to make herself invisible into someone who lived boldly and joyfully. They had been an invitation and a declaration, a gift from someone who saw her value when she could not see it herself. And they had been the foundation of a love story that spanned decades, shaped lives, and proved that the cruelest judgments of society were nothing compared to the power of true acceptance and genuine love. As the night deepened and the desert air cooled around them, Ben and Eleanor went inside their home, their hands still linked as they had been for over 30 years. Tomorrow would bring new joys and perhaps new challenges. Their grandchildren would visit, loud and loving. Ben would cook something special, because he always did. Eleanor would work on the christening gown she was making for their newest great-grandchild, due to arrive in a few months. They would share meals and conversations, laughter and love, all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that made up a life well lived. But for now, in this quiet moment at the end of another good day, they simply held each other and counted their blessings. A chance meeting on a violent afternoon had led to a dinner invitation, which had led to falling in love, which had led to building a family and a life together. It had all started with an act of basic human kindness, one person standing up for another, and a simple invitation to share a meal. And because Eleanor had accepted that invitation, because Ben had cooked with care and love, because they had both been brave enough to see past the judgments of others and recognize something precious in each other, they had found their way to this moment, to a home filled with love and memories, to children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward, to a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger, to a love that had never wavered or diminished, but had only grown deeper and richer with time. They had found everything they needed in each other. And it had all started with 5 simple words, spoken with kindness and meaning, that had given Eleanor permission to be fully herself. Eat until you are full. Those words had nourished more than just her body. They had fed her soul, her heart, her spirit. They had been the beginning of healing and wholeness, of learning to love herself as she was loved. And every day since, Ben had continued to offer that same gift, not just with food but with everything. The permission to be fully human, to have needs and appetites, to take up space and pursue dreams, to live without shame or apology. It was the greatest gift one person could give another, and Eleanor had spent their years together trying to give the same gift back. To show Ben that he was valued for who he was, that his heritage was something to honor, that his kindness and talent and love made him extraordinary. To create a home where he could be fully himself, where both of them could be fully themselves, where their children could grow up free from the shame and judgment they had both endured. They had built something beautiful together, and as they prepared for bed that night, moving through the familiar rituals of a long marriage with comfortable ease, both of them felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived and a love well earned. Tomorrow and all the tomorrows after would bring whatever they brought, but Ben and Eleanor would face them together, just as they had faced everything for the past 32 years. And every Saturday, without fail, Ben would cook Eleanor a special meal, and when she sat down at the table, he would tell her the same thing he had told her on that first night. Eat until you are full. And she always did.